Guys, if you're like me, you get impatient during the winter time, you don't want to throw a drop shot or dragging Ned rig every day, or heck, sometimes you got to locate fish. Throwing a drop shot or dragging a Ned rig is super slow. Pick up a blade bait if you haven't tried it already. I'm sure you guys have heard, cold winter time, you guys got to try a blade bait. But I think a lot of the problem is new people get out there, or even experienced guys, I see them not utilizing a blade bait to its fullest extent. You got to locate these fish. This is not a lipless crankbait. I will tell you that right now. Feels like it, looks like it, it is not. There's a certain way to work these baits that makes you catch a lot more fish and trigger a lot more fish throughout the winter time. So let's break it down a little step by step here for you. First thing you're gonna notice here, big heavyweight piece of metal, thin blade, displaces actually a lot of water on the lift. Unlike a lipless crankbait, this bait excels on the lift. When it falls, there is no action. So it's designed to get to the bottom fast, and with short strokes of the rod, it gets a really hard thump. Blade baits out thump a typical lipless crankbait. A lot of people just assume you cast that to the bank and reel it in. You're almost throwing it out there like a football jig, taking little short sweeps of the rod, and you're keeping it within a foot of the bottom. That's why it excels in the wintertime. Most often the bass are associating down in the wintertime. They got their bellies in the mud or looking down there for crawdads or gobies. Typically there's not a lot of stuff high in the water column that time of year. That's why the blade bait excels. Believe it or not, clean water or dirty water, this bait flat out catches them. But let me show you where I think most people go wrong retrieving this bait, and I'll show you exactly how to do it correctly. All right, guys, these baits are great for covering water. Long cast, you just want to make sure it gets out there and gets to the bottom. Middle of the water column is much more of a vertical fishing, over the top of trees, or straight vertically fishing on your 2D sonar, straight down below, or live, whatever you have now. All you're gonna do is take short little lifts of the rod and pick up the slack with the reel. You do not want to take your hand off the reel and work this bait like this. I used to do this all the time. What happens is a lot of the time it'll sit there steady, and the moment you go to do this, they eat it, or when you come up here and you go to drop down, your hand's not on there, and they eat it and you're out of position. So a lot of the time when you're doing that little lift, they'll eat it right at the top of that little pump, and you're only coming up about a foot off the bottom. But the benefit of having your hand on the reel is that they hit you in a higher position with the rod. And I'll say, hey, don't go up too high with the rod. That way you still have room to hook set. But even if they do hit you here, you can catch them fast on the reel. Believe it or not, I use an 8-speed reel. I'm only picking up the slack in between, guys. I can feel this bait hitting the bottom, so I know I'm not going too fast and retrieving it through the middle of the water column. I know I'm down, little lift, reel down, little lift, reel down. Just don't take your hand off that reel. One thing you're gonna notice about all blade baits is there's usually multiple holes in the top. If there's one, man, I really doubt they put a lot of research into the bait, but you'll notice right here on the steel shad, there's two. The far back hole is going to increase the rake or the ride angle of your bait. This is the front of your head, this is the back. That front hole, your bait's gonna ride like that, okay? So the treble hooks are gonna be a little bit closer to the bottom there. And that back hole is gonna increase your rake over at that right angle. So even if you are bumping bottom, your treble hooks are behind the bait. So when you increase that angle going into the back hole, you have a harder rake. Therefore, your bait's gonna vibrate sooner as you lift that rod tip. You'll notice it vibrates a little bit later in the front hole. So if I am going to cast it to the bank or work it out deep, you're gonna see me fishing that back hole 90% of the time. When is the exception for fishing the front hole? Simple. If I was throwing a lipless crankbait a little earlier in the year, and don't pigeonhole this to just a wintertime bait. Let's say they stop biting the lipless crankbait, or it gets a little calmer out, a little slicker out, or a little cleaner to where that real audible, like something like a rattle trap, would normally get bit in windier and dirtier water. It gets cleaner, gets calmer. All of a sudden, I will bust out a blade bait, put it in that front hole, and work it identical to a lipless crankbait. But that's not what this bait is designed to do. So if you see me in the front hole there, I was on lipless crankbait fish, probably throwing a rattle trap, and it got a little slick, got a little calm, and I made the change to a blade bait. But if I'm fishing winter style, I am always in that back hole. Aside from casting and doing that yo-yo style retrieval, vertical fishing a blade bait is extremely deadly, especially out here in Northern California where I live. Up in our lakes, our spotted bass are super aggressive. This happens to be a 1/2 ouncer here. A lot of the time, I'll see them on sonar. I will drop straight down to them. I'll thumb my spool to where I hit the bottom, and I'm strictly gonna point my rod tip at the water and little tiny pumps. I don't typically wanna come more than a foot off of the bottom. What that's gonna do, when I'm feeling that, I can feel it. That 1/2 ounce, I'm typically good down to about 25, 30 feet. If I'm beyond that, and yeah, we fish some deep stuff out here, I'll go to the 3/4 ounce. With the size of my bait, I'm strictly matching the forage base. If I'm on bigger bait, I'm gonna go to that bigger steel shad. On smaller bait, I'm gonna downsize and go down. One thing you can do if you're fishing those little ones is fishing on spinning gear. One thing I wanna show you guys right here, these are small treble hooks. You do not want a tight drag. Look at that, see that? My drag coming off nice and easy. These baits have a lot of weight. When they get them, they're not hooked very deep. Typically, they're usually slashing at this. It's a reaction bait, so when it yo-yos up, they slap it and instinctual, get out of my space. And a lot of the time, they're gonna get skin hooked, so run a relatively loose drag and throw it on like a crankbait set. You know, something with a nice soft tip. This happens to be the Stix number 3, the hybrid stick that I'm throwing it on right here. Really, really good setup for this. On those smaller baits, you know, beyond 1/4 ounce and down, I'm gonna definitely suggest throwing in like 10 or 8 pound test on a spinning rod. And that spinning rod oftentimes is gonna help you slow down too, if you're finding yourself reeling too fast. Number one mistake people want to do with this bait is they wanna throw it out and they really wanna feel that vibration. They love it. This thing almost feels like a vibrating jig. But the reality is you just want to barely feel it moving. That just slight thud, thud, thud right there. It's silent, but deadly. Kind of like taking your dog for a ride in the car. All right, guys, a little retrieval tip right here. If you're around a lot of snags, but you still want to throw that blade bait, you typically don't want to let your bait hit on slack. So there's a little trick here. You're going to see me lift, and I'm going to 1, 2, and all I'm going to do is maintain line tension the whole time. If I'm around a lot of snags, maintaining that line tension, if I do get a little snag, I'm usually not deep into that hang up. And I'll show you with my hands exactly what's taking place here. So, as I reel and maintain line tension, the bait's coming down at a pendulum angle like that, and I'm lifting, it's penduluming down. Versus yo-yo with slack and it hits the bottom, then you yo-yo it back up and slack and it hits the bottom is great for rock, sand, shell bar. Great way to get that reactionary, that straight drop down and that lift. A lot of time if they're cold and it falls by their head, it tricks them. But if you got a lot of stumps, a lot of tall grass and debris, you want to go with that semi-tight line. So every time you yo-yo, take a reel or two, make sure the line's tight as that bait pendulum and hits the bottom versus just that yo-yo and stop. You're gonna notice it's really quite different. So watch my retrieve right here with my hands. This is really neat for you. So tell me what type of bottom I have on my lake right now. That's right, a lot of snags, a lot of loose debris down there. But if I was up in a high mountain reservoir, I'll tell you, this is the retrieval you would see right here. I'm gonna put it out there, high mountain reservoir, clean bottom, hit, hit. And the reason why the steel shad has a really natural way of when you lift and you drop it on slack line, it darts and it hunts around. Even when I'm vertical fishing, that bait never wants to land in the exact same spot. And this is why it drives bass crazy. When you see them on the graph and you're bumping the bottom, you lift, it hunts around, very similar to an ice fishing bait. And I'll tell you what, this thing catches so many different species, crappie, salmon, largemouth, spotted bass, smallmouth, you name it. Everything bites this thing. I'm Nick the Informative Fisherman, and that's the blade bait, guys. If you haven't checked them out yet, hey, pick up the steel shad. This is one I've been playing with for a couple years now. I know you guys probably see me on social media doing custom paint jobs on these things, and everybody wanted to know how I fish them. That's the exact way I fish them, no matter where you go. Drop us a follow, guys. I appreciate you watching.